We're back on Talkin TV. It's me, Dom, the movie nerd. I feel like you guys should know that at this point, but I don't know. To my right, as per always, Chris, TVN.
TV nerd.
Oh, you're officially gonna go by TV nerd now?
Because we need the merchandise line. So
oh, you're right.
The movie nerd
you're
merchandise
right.
line and the TV nerd merchandise line.
You're absolutely
right. So I guess
right.
my Twitter handle down the line might be TVN if I can't get the full TV nerd, but it's sort of like with this movie, they want you to say the whole bullshit title.
Oh yeah, I'm
so
not
you gotta
saying
say
that.
my whole bullshit
that's the one
title.
thing that's the one thing I will give you. I'm not saying that goddamn fucking title. I wrote in my Letterboxd review. I've said, and now we're on to Harley Quinn, and put in parentheses. I'm like, I am not saying that goddamn fucking long title. I'm sorry. It's already bad enough that these movies try to make me say their long ass title in order to try and I don't know, make themselves more important. But it's like, guys, you're just hurting yourself in the long run. They expect me to say Rogue One, a Star Wars story, or Solo, a Star Wars story. And I get it, that's shorter, but it's
honest,
no one's gonna call them that. They're just gonna say Rogue One or Solo. Just give it a rest. And not to give to shit on the great man himself, George Lucas, but it's Star Wars, Episode 1, whatever. It's buddy, it's Star Wars. Just leave it at that. Come on, you're not helping yourself.
You're on that basis with George Lucas. Huh?
I'm on my relationship with George Lucas changes on a daily basis. It's about as inconsistent as the movie that we were about to talk about, and that's the one thing that I will give you. But first, I gotta introduce. We got another guest, people. We've had a decent amount of guests coming through the Talkin TV doors lately. A lot more than I actually thought we were gonna get when we first started this episode. But I'm proud. And Guy, introduce yourself, please, to
Guy,
the Talkin TV audience.
Not Guy.
I don't know. I don't know why I do that. I always have that thing where it's any guy that I don't really know as well. I'm I just say Guy. Nobody usually notices.
I get it though, because you want to give him the power of saying his name for the first time on the podcast.
I'm trying to give the power back to the wielder. If anything, I'm trying to help him.
Okay, well, helping is Dom to me, Joey. My name is Joey here. Go by NY Average Joe on Twitter. I am not a big talking nerd. But I am a very nerdy person. I love all that kind of shit. So I'm here to talk about the Birds of Prey, the emancipation of one Harley Quinn.
The fabulous
Fabulous?
and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. There, we said it, DC.
It's fucking dumb.
God damn it, we said your fucking long ass bullshit title.
Well, she wrote it. It's like when she wrote her business card inside. But she wrote this on top of Birds of Prey.
Here's the thing about that. If we're just here's the thing about that. I don't blame them because from a marketing standpoint, I get it. It's very emblematic of the character, but again, it's just
it was definitely a Harley Quinn movie.
It's very a Harley Quinn. It's a Harley Quinn move, I would say.
That's true.
But it's come on, guys, what are you doing? Aquaman, Shazam, Man of Steel, Wonder Woman. You were already asking a lot. You were already asking a lot of people when you said Batman versus Superman, and then you had to tack on the little Dawn of Justice. It's guys. You had it. So nobody was ever not going to call it Batman versus Superman. Come on.
So you're happy with WW84 for the next Wonder Woman?
I mean, I was just going to call it...
that's the dumbest part.
Wonder Woman 84 rolls off the title. It's say the thing and then see how it flows. That's the key. Flow, rhythm. It's got to have that perfect... what's that called? Dynamic pentameter? I don't know. It's been a while since I've been in school. But the point being, it has to flow off the tongue, Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Perfect. I'm sorry. That's fucking... Shut up. God damn it. Don't
Honestly,
give me credit for...
this movie should have been called Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey.
Yeah, thank you.
Where was that?
Seriously.
If Margot Robbie is going on all these talk shows right now and making all these appearances about how she also was such a key role in the production and being a producer, doesn't that look bad for her? That all that marketing money, Warner Brothers, they couldn't have figured out hey, maybe we just flip it around and actually say what the movie's about, which is Harley Quinn and then the Birds of Prey, not the other way around.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Was that so hard to do?
Yeah, and it's actually funny that you bring that up because about Margot Robbie taking an executive producer role, because that actually brings up something that I wanted to, that was to me one of the biggest standout points of this movie, which was that this movie kind of felt like the Deadpool of the DC universe.
It was their attempt.
Absolutely. And in the sense of,
said that walking out of the theater
especially because you bringing that up, where again the whole thing thing about Deadpool, again, one of the saving graces is obviously the fact of how hard Ryan Reynolds fought behind the scenes with Fox in order to get that character made the right way after the debacle that was X-Men Origins. This is, again, a very similar situation. Obviously, the exception being that Margot Robbie, again, it was the highlight of the Suicide Squad, but also just the fact that we kind of went to WB when they were kind of reforming after the whole Justice League mess, when they kind of just settled into their new stance of being like, hey, we're just going to give all these heroes like all the solo movies and then kind of see what happens. And that so far has been working out for them pretty well. As I said, they pretty much, they kept the actors that everybody liked. They dumped all the ones that people didn't really give a shit about. So sorry, Henry Cavill. Sorry, Ben Affleck.
Rip Jared Leto.
Yeah, right. Really? No, that
What they
one.
should have got rid of.
No, that one they're just trying to forget about. That's the thing.
Yeah.
What they should have gotten rid of was Ezra Miller, and I've had this conversation many times. I'm the biggest Flash nerd. I'll be back in 2020 now, or 2022.
Whenever that.
When we're getting that
thing's
movie,
coming
which
out.
is
I still don't even think that movie's coming out.
We're doing a 12-year run.
Supposedly,
12 years. Okay,
supposedly
so sign me
the
up for
director
the
of
Flashpoint movie, which I'm mad that it's even Flashpoint.
Supposedly the director of It is doing that movie, which I'm like, I mean, I like that director. I think he works well with actors, but like, just tonally and stylistically, I don't see him. Like, I see somebody much more so like a Matthew Vaughn.
Well, it is going to be a dark, like Thomas Wayne's
not
Batman.
Again. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know why. And this is probably just like, again, I blame Snyder completely for this, but like every time I hear the words dark and DC in the same sentence, I'm like, fuck off. I don't care. Jesus Christ, move on. Joker almost fooled me, and then actually watched the movie, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit.
The brand new Joker one?
No, I did not like that movie at all.
To me,
like, at all.
Yeah, same. To me,
I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. That was probably a top.
Well, for different reasons than...
I mean, DC movies different than, like, actual good movies.
Right. Well,
but I think Joker was an actually
the difference
good
being
movie.
also that instead of just being like
I can
another...
see why you say that. A lot of people liked it.
Because instead of being like another shitty, like, dark comic book movie, it's instead just... Now it's trying to masquerade as art. When A, it's nothing but, like, a Scorsese jerk-off, and B, it is. And B, it's another situation where it's trying to pretend like it's this, big artsy-fartsy thing that's making this big statement about mental health, and it's like, buddy, if your name wasn't Joker and you weren't at all tied to the Batman mythos, nobody would be watching your fucking movie. You know?
I mean, one thing I do want to say, bringing it back to like that dark word, it's sort of like how like there's buzzwords around like sports and there's buzzwords around like music now, like that's like that song's hot, that song's like, you know, like all these production terms. Dark has now become like a shitty buzzword, I think, to help fill seats in like the DC universe, and it's like, okay,
definitely,
like
that's the one thing to Marvel.
That's the one thing I will give Marvel, is that like they don't rely on like bullshit little things like that to help fill their seats. They've built. I don't agree with the movies.
Bullshit of the Marvel movies.
Yeah, I don't agree with the movies. I definitely don't agree with the formula. I actually hate that like the formula is a thing that people discuss, because like art should be ever flowing and free. That's a whole different podcast. But what I will give Marvel over DC is that they don't just try to fucking put like the word dark on something and try to like make you believe you're watching something that you're not. I will give them that.
Definitely.
And I think that happened with this movie.
Yes.
So why don't we just jump in now and really start dissecting this
so
film?
so basically, to break this movie down, again, I'm trying to think now. 1, 2. This is again, it debates because the whole weird stance of Joker, but this is if you want to count Joker, fourth, if not, then third DC cinematic universe that has taken place in this whole kind of worlds of DC mess ever since Justice League, where now this time we're following the character of Harley Quinn, still portrayed by Margot Robbie in her days post-Suicide Squad, and the film makes clear very upfront her and the Joker are done. They are finished, they are broken up, they make that a stand several times to the point where they are repeating it all of the time. Literally, I think it's repeated like probably like a minimum of like 400 times throughout just the first.
I really liked how they went through that with the
and that is really interesting.
Was really cool.
And we'll get to that. But the whole thing is that in the wake of the Joker's disappearance and WB's vast attempt in order to leave Jared Leto completely behind and just completely forget about the fact that he was ever in those movies in the first place, unfortunately, kind of the crime wave within Gotham has been left wide open, and now there is a new gangster that is seeking to fill that spot, that being Roman Sionis, aka the Black Mask, portrayed with fervent, embodying his best Tim Curry impersonation, being Ewan McGregor, Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, and so as a result, Harley ends in her continuing escapades throughout Gotham, ends up forming this allegiance of sorts in a weird way when she discovers that a young runaway named Cassandra Cain has unintentionally stolen the key to Roman's rise to power in Gotham, that being the famed Bertinelli Diamond, and this ends up bringing in 3 other future masked crusaders, that being Mary Elizabeth Winstead's Helena Bertinelli, aka the Huntress, Journey Smollett Bell's Dinah Lance, aka Black Canary, and Rosie Perez's Renee Montoya, who again in this movie is never referred to, but who would later become the character of the Question. And they end up forming their own little ragged, badass unit that ends up going up against the evil criminal Sionis in order to bring him down. So
yeah, and that picture is really painted with the 30 seconds of screen time.
Pretty much
at the end.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And so they really drove
the
that
Birds
one
of
home.
Prey, the final
right?
20-minute
So
arc.
actually, Dom, I just want to let people know how I feel about this movie. Your description right there was more concrete and better told than what I saw of the actual Birds of Prey as a unit in the film. So just setting the tone early in this
Right.
podcast, as we still have the better half
Right,
of 50
definitely.
minutes.
So I
to
guess
go.
so I guess you kind of jumped the gun, because I was going to ask you what you thought of this movie, but I guess hey, you're already into it. So
Well, that kind of talks about what we were just saying, where this isn't a Birds of Prey movie. This is a Harley Quinn movie.
Right.
For the first hour and 30 minutes. And then at the end, we say,
Yeah, you get-
oh, we've kind of formed the Birds of Prey. Now they'll go fly on and do
yeah,
their thing.
it definitely does raise a little bit of a confusing point just when it comes to the marketing, because again, the movie is Birds of Prey first, Harley Quinn second, but anybody who watches this movie, and quite frankly, anybody who would have watched the trailers again would have been like, no, this is Harley Quinn's movie.
is Harley Quinn.
Yeah, which again, that's not a problem. Like, Harley Quinn is, she is a very interesting character. She's a
think it's the only way
hilarious
you do this
character.
movie.
She's one of the best characters, I think, that has been presented in this iteration, the previous iteration of the DC when they were in their Marvel copycat days. So it's like, why not just make this front and center about her?
So, yes, and so this leads me to my next point where I want to throw it to Joe. Joe works in copywriting, and so he obviously has, like, a more logistical eye and a business eye towards, like, the whole marketing campaigns and all that stuff. So whenever we speak about a DC movie, we can't help talking about Marvel. And whenever we speak about a
kind of inevitable
superhero,
at this point.
yeah, and
Yeah,
whenever we
the
speak about a superhero franchise, for some reason, as opposed to when we talk about like an Irishman or something like that, we talk about the marketing. So like, why do you think that is, and how do you feel the marketing has affected or hurt the film that we just watched? Because I'm curious to like take it from that angle, because for some reason,
no, it's interesting because marketing does have such a huge part in like every single movie that we watch now, and to kind of discount that and not count that towards it, like I think that's foolish on our parts.
Yeah, I mean, and you saw it in Suicide Squad, because
Absolutely.
Suicide Squad's marketing was incredible. And it was so good, the way that they described every character, the vibe of it, the soundtrack behind it, which was still an incredible soundtrack. This one kind of mirrored that in a way with the soundtrack behind it. But they were still very, very vibrant movies. The greens, all of these like very, very vibrant colors. They made it look like it's going to be this very fun movie. And that's what I loved about Suicide Squad. And then it ended up not even using that kind of vibe throughout the entire movie.
Like there was barely
Tone,
any
everything.
Yeah, with the exception of like the intro cards when they introduced the character, there was like that movie was honestly like probably one of the grossest looking movies I think I've ever seen. Like it's got this really awful looking like gray, black,
it's
kind of with
disgusting.
this pukish green outline and
Yeah.
everything, and it just
But
looks
that's what
disgusting.
I love compared to this, which looked visually incredible.
Yes.
I loved the look of this movie. They did have, start to use the word again, the darker tone of the movie, but then all these vibrant colors popping out, especially in the precinct scene when they were in the police precinct, where she
definitely.
had that beanbag launching grenade launcher that
Yeah.
launched all these crazy colors, all the
That was
smoke.
fun.
Yeah,
that was
a
really,
very
really
fun
cool.
sequence.
So yeah, like just in terms of that, like how this movie marketed itself a little less than Suicide Squad did, but I think what like to your point, this should have been the Harley Quinn movie with Birds of Prey.
Well, it's not that it should have been. It was. It's just it should have been marketed.
But
as
it
such.
marketed it that way, we would have known, okay, this is straight up a Harley Quinn movie. I saw Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad. I want to see Harley Quinn again.
And so-
I don't really care about the Birds of Prey at the moment because,
because
we
I
haven't
don't
gotten
know
introduced to
them.
them. We don't know them.
Exactly. And so that's the way I feel about DC. I've always thought that DC has the better IP. Their characters have been around for longer. They've sold way
sure.
more copies than Marvel, and everyone knows Batman and Superman. All right, I tried this with a bunch of the old folks in my family because I was like, hey, you know what? I'm doing a podcast. Grandpa, do you know Batman? Yes. Do you know Spider-Man? I think I do. I mean, I've heard of it, but like Batman and Superman, those are locks. So for me, it's just frustrating to see how they have ideally a stronger footing going into this, but they just skew things so much with their marketing, like Joe was just saying, that they end up shooting themselves in the foot. And that's my biggest gripe with all of this. And so do you think this movie shot itself in the foot?
Right, well, it's funny because to go back to your point again, the whole idea is behind these comic book IPs, properties, and it's funny even going back to Marvel's that ideally at the end of the day, they do want to be for kids because those are ultimately, in theory, previously at least,
we're all big kids.
What is going to bring in the most amount of box office, what is going to bring in the most amount of money, and because the whole origin of this whole Marvel Cinematic Universe literally started with studio executives bringing in kids, laying down a series of Marvel toys and asking which ones they thought they liked the coolest. I am dead serious. That is how the whole MCU guys are. That is 100% true. Look it up. But to kind of
Look it up.
I'm serious. But to kind of I only bring up true facts on here. But
True,
to kind of bring it back to that again, it's a situation of where kind of to your point of where again the whole thing is this movie doesn't really want to market itself. Yes, they want to make you aware of the fact that this is the same character from Suicide Squad, but at the same time they're trying to distance themselves, and I feel that kind of creates this little bit of flux where they're trying to again. It's the biggest problem that they've had so far. I feel like with their new movies, and they've been doing a very good job of overcoming those hurdles. But again, when it's a situation with Aquaman, or like with this new Wonder Woman movie that's coming out, Shazam is a little bit of an exception because that's a new character that you hadn't seen before. Yeah. But it's like they're still trying to use all of these characters that people liked from their previous movies while trying to distance themselves from the tones that those movies set up and trying to get into kind of these new tones. But kind of also to bounce off of your point is that what I'll say just about what I think about this movie first and foremost is that yes, it still does have a little bit of the same problem that Suicide Squad had in that it doesn't really establish, I think, a consistent tone. But here's what I'll give this movie that Suicide Squad didn't. Suicide Squad felt like a studio-mandated product that ultimately, at the end of the day, felt like they were so scared about the final product that they were going to have that they literally just pulled, to me, what is still the dumbest move that a studio has ever done and handed the goddamn movie off to the freaking trailer house that edited the trailers in order to edit. And that was the movie that we got. Yeah. This movie, at the very least, say what you will about the tone, but at the very least, the way that it is edited, the way that it is produced, the way that it looks, it feels like the embodiment of something that would happen within the mind of the character of Harley Quinn. So say what you will about the marketing, at the very least, I feel like I am watching a movie about Harley Quinn, and I feel like this is a movie that embodies to me what it is that everybody loved about that character. So even though they may not have produced the best movie, goddamn it, they nailed this freaking character.
Yeah, and like to your point where you're talking about like distancing themselves from Suicide Squad, like the best part of Suicide Squad was Margot Robbie. Yes. It was Harley Quinn. Mm-hmm. So I think you can own that, and DC should have owned that and said this is the Harley Quinn movie and the Birds of Prey.
Right.
So because that's the movie, and we all know that. We all saw that.
No, we all know it. It is the movie.
So own that. Harley Quinn is your moneymaker in this movie. That's why people are going to see this movie. So own that. Make this the Harley Quinn movie, and then that marketing campaign is solid. We know what we're going to see. We see it. We love it because it's Harley Quinn and everything that we know she's about. And then you're good to go.
And this is another thing I'll give Marvel because they recognize when they have something good. And so when I was, preparing for this episode this morning, just reading articles and seeing like what was going on around the film, not on the set or in the movie itself, because I like to get those perspectives and be able to speak on that stuff. It blew my mind when Margot Robbie seemingly had to bang down the door of Warner Brothers to get this film made. I mean, you had the one glimmer of hope from Suicide Squad, the one thing that everyone was saying actually worked, and yet you're just trying to do something else. Like they need to learn, like I said, with these strong characters. Like Harley Quinn is a very strong character, and you can tell that Margot Robbie and the creative team really knew this character well, and thank God they did, because I'm glad we're probably going to get a second chance to see her again.
Yep.
But it just blows my mind that we're all sitting here saying like that's like one of the main things that worked in this movie that I'm sure we'll get to the problems soon in, and she had to beg to get this made. Like, what is going on at Warner Brothers?
It's a Warner Brothers thing, because like I don't know if you guys have heard, but the whole Superman debacle.
Yes.
So obviously Henry Cavill was amazing, in my opinion. I thought Henry Cavill was
Henry Cavill was good when he was being given good material to work with.
Yes. So there was an article that came out probably about 3 months ago that Warner Brothers does not want to make a Superman movie because they don't think that storyline is currently relatable. Which, what are you talking about? He is a reporter in this world. He's an alien reporter. Like this, there's just things that they can do with this IP. Like right now, the news, everything's fake. All this stuff going on and around around news about reporting, that they don't think that is a storyline that we can make Superman, like about all these like alienating things that are happening to like certain people. Like there's a perfect storyline in there that you can get.
It's always kind of been like a hot topic button because the whole thing with Superman has always been the fact that if you just make it about like the typical superhero, you know, showing of the powers, you know, action spectacle, then yeah, it does get a little bit boring because then again, we do end up in the third act of Man of Steel with
it's Superman.
I agree. And that's the thing is that what's it called? In order to kind of bring it back to my point again, why Man of Steel was probably I don't think Man of Steel is a bad movie. I think it's a lot more tonally consistent than a lot of the DC movies that we've gotten. But again, why that to me was the worst movie possible in order to kick off, say, a cinematic universe. Not just because Snyder had no interest in making a cinematic universe with all these different characters. He only had his ideas for Superman, Batman, and the Justice League, right? They were all ancillary to him. It's the fact of Man of Steel, besides being, to me, not the best Superman movie, was trying to be like a deconstructive thing, almost like a Watchmen, almost, where he's trying to show kind of like how scary and awful these superheroes would be in real life, while at the same time trying to make this like this wondrous, you know, escapading thing, you know, with this dueling ideologies. Again, it's a situation of playing around with way too many ideas and trying to have your cake and eat it too, where it's like, I'm sorry, you can't play it both ways. You either make a deconstructive piece like a Watchmen that shows how dangerous and awful superheroes like The Boys, that shows how dangerous and awful superheroes would be in this day and age, or you make a goddamn Superman movie. You can't have it both ways. And us having it both ways, exactly. That's what gave us Man of Steel, and that's what kicked off this whole disaster train that we rode on, that we've been riding on for these last 6, 7, 8 years now.
And so two things I want to say, because I think like a lot of people write actors off when they see them in a performance like Man of Steel. Oh, Henry Cavill was the problem. No, I don't think it was the problem, because there actually is a Superman run called American Alien, where Superman is alone in America because he doesn't fit in and he feels alienated and isolated. And this actually came out in 2008. So it's almost like those writers sort of predicted the political turn that we would take. So you can do exactly what you were saying, Joe, with that IP. But again, to me, it's just the Warner Brothers thing of, well, why is Henry Cavill so great in The Witcher? Because he can act. It's a matter of like the creative direction and the tone, which you keep saying, which is not clear in DC. And that is one thing I do actually want to give credit to this film. Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn, right? That the tone was there. It really helped paint the picture of this delusional psychopathic who is a very educated woman, but also obviously, you know what they say about people who study psychiatry. Maybe some of them are studying it so they can diagnose themselves. And I think they really exemplified that in this film. But like, I do have to ask you guys, so if we are saying that this movie had a clear vision and if we like the performances, why aren't we just sitting here sort of just like singing its praises? Because there is some things that didn't work, right?
And that's honestly, I actually wanted to bounce off, because again, the idea of having a clear vision, I think, is something that we would be giving this movie far too much praise to, because again, this is another situation where DC is using a fairly new director. I checked this director, her name's Kathy Yan. She's only had like one feature before this, done a bunch of shorts. So I think the idea of this having a clear vision is, again, what would be heresy, because again, if you look at, not just within DC, but heresy, all of these, well, yeah, I like using those big words.
That's a good word.
Within all of like kind of these big budget superhero movies, you know, we've kind of been seeing this again. Marvel unintentionally jump started this train, but Sony, I feel like, really ran this into the ground when they obviously got Mark Webb for the Amazing Spider-Man movies, hiring him off one movie, you know, 500 Days of Summer, which to me is still like the eponymous pinnacle of the highest point that rom-coms will ever reach. But to do this huge, big budget Spider-Man movie, and again, him doing the best job that he possibly could, but that kind of jump-started this train that we've seen this entire past decade of getting these random one-off indie directors that maybe have like 1 or 2 movies under their belt and putting them and plucking them right from the festivals circuit and putting them in an experience where they have no fucking clue what they're doing. They're putting them in these giant spectacle-ridden like monstrosities with all this different talent, and again, it's a situation where the studio machine is running so quickly that they barely have any time to express your kind of artistic potential.
But why does that work with Marvel? Like, Kevin Feige was literally, you know, doing something completely different, but why doesn't it work with DC?
So I'm actually going to bring something up really interesting about that, because about why so much of the thing with Marvel works is that, so there was an interview that the Black Widow director had. Her name is Kate Shortland, where she was brought in, and because she wasn't the first choice, I forget who they had for the first choice, but the first choice walked, similar to what happened with Edgar Wright when he walked from Ant-Man. It's similar to how when Patty Jenkins walked from Thor: The Dark World and they replaced them with Alan Taylor. And the whole thing that she said about that was, they brought her in, they approached her, and they were like, okay, we want you to do this. You know, they said that Marvel was, of course, very free form, very unrestrained. They kind of were very receptive to their creative vision about what they wanted to do with the character and all that, yada, yada, yada. That was great. But then they bring up the word, but I don't really know how to direct action sequences. And, like, all the stuff that you guys do is cool, but, like, I don't really know if I'm going to be the person to do that. And Marvel was like, oh, we got that covered. Because literally, no joke, this is a thing that is true about Marvel movies. Marvel has their action sequences planned out months before they even hire the directors for the goddamn movies.
Wow.
I shit you not. They had the pre-concept viz for the action sequences in Ant-Man planned out before they ever brought on Edgar Wright.
So then that makes me ask the question, that begs the question rather, do superhero movies need a clear-cut formula and blueprint to succeed?
Or I feel like the other question we should be asking is, do superhero movies, like, again, if the studios already have this shit planned out, again, what's the point of even having the artists involved? And I hate that we have to ask that question, but it's like, is it literally just to coordinate with the talent? Is it like to design the characters? Like, the mold is already there. We have the fucking years upon years of comic books, you know, fans spouting shit on the internet every 30 seconds about what the most accurate representation of these characters are.
It's almost like they're automating films where these
Literally,
are like directorless.
not even that's literally what they're doing.
I do want to bring up the point about what you're saying, where this formula works for Marvel, bringing in all this new talent. Patty Jenkins was relatively new talent, and she nailed Wonder Woman. Then they brought in someone as big as James Wan to do Aquaman, and he nails Aquaman.
Well, just for those two specific examples, James Wan has a long history of directing really interesting horror movies, but also the fact that he had already had a big budget experience as the director of the Fast and Furious, the 7th movie. And also Patty Jenkins, again, was going to direct Thor the Dark World, and also she directed the movie. Did you watch the 2003 movie Monster with Charlize Theron, where she portrayed Eileen Wuornos? Oh, great movie. But yeah, so the point being that these weren't like inexperienced directors. It's not quite the same of Marvel, like picking up like, say, oh my god, what was the most recent example that I could think of? Like Marvel's whole thing was Marvel didn't go for guys. It was like the equivalent of like Fox picking up Josh Trank to do Fantastic Four after Chronicle. You know, you put Chronicle next to Fantastic Four, right? Do those even look like they were directed by the same person? Yeah,
and one's good and one's terrible.
Yeah.
So
Can you use the word dark in both of them?
God,
Because
no.
they were both.
I mean, Chronicle, has a dark
Chronicle
tone.
is a dark movie, but the difference being that Chronicle is actually like its tone. It has a dark, consistent tone because that's the path that the character that it is about is set on. Versus Fantastic Four is just dark and gritty because I don't know, low color filtering to cover up shitty looking CG.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that early 2000 stuff is some of it's rough.
Except this is the problem. That Fantastic Four movie came out in 2015.
Oh, I was thinking of the.
No, that's Tim Story. That's a whole different.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't,
I actually didn't see. So then I will have to clarify this for the record. I didn't actually see that movie because
you didn't miss
that
anything.
that was before
You didn't
it
miss
was
a goddamn
the
thing.
newer Fantastic Four?
Yeah,
That
one.
Oh my god.
The
Yeah,
one with
don't-
Miles Teller.
That's when it was difficult to get me in a seat, and you really had to sell the film. And that movie sold one thing to me, and it was that I will never watch this fucking movie.
Oh my
It
god!
looked that
And again,
bad.
best decision you probably made that whole goddamn year.
Yeah, can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Here, check the biography in 30
so anyways,
years.
but so kind of bringing it back to this movie, again, we've talked a lot about the idea of tone and kind of a lot of the studio meddling and interference because we have to, because that is a big part of it. But I guess the thing that I want to talk about now is kind of like, was there a way for the Birds of Prey to kind of be introduced in a more naturalistic way? Because I feel like all of the seeds for them to be interesting characters and to kind of have it be structured as more of this ensemble piece were there. But it almost felt like the movie kind of couldn't decide whether it wanted it to be an ensemble piece or whether it wanted, like, kind of just to use this movie as kind of like a backdoor pilot almost for their respective franchise, and then have Harley Quinn kind of go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was also all of these backstories that are coming in for Huntress, for Black Canary, for the question that we eventually don't get to know that who she is. But these are all coming from the mind of Harley Quinn.
Right.
So she doesn't know all the intricacies of these guys' backstories as much as what we want to see. But these were all coming from her mind. So she knows the Huntress backstory of like what we all would know from reading maybe one or two of her comic books. But they don't have she doesn't have this like immense knowledge that was the direction that they chose.
Right.
They chose to do it from Harley Quinn's point of view, not the world's point of view.
Right, exactly. And so like as a plot device, as an interesting, cool plot device in order to introduce them, right, that's fine.
Which I think goes back to the beginning of this conversation, why this film will inevitably suffer from the way it was marketed.
Yes.
And titled.
Yes.
But, Dom, continue,
But
please.
but to kind of continue off of that, it's like, yeah, that's great for their introductions, and kind of like I gotta backtrack now. Again, that to me was very emblematic of Deadpool, because that's literally how the entire first half of the first Deadpool movie plays out. Is going all over the place.
That, by the way.
Right, literally.
It felt like a homage to the entire
but
film,
if anything, I feel like it in a weird way, like more naturalistic to the character. You know, like that's not something that Deadpool would, like in Deadpool, it was just a plot device in order to sell that script. Like that's not something that character would do. This here, it felt naturalistic to that character.
It was the only character in DC that I think that kind of style would work with.
Right.
Would be
So I
Harley
give
Quinn.
them a
And
lot
I
of
also
credit
think
for
the
that.
casting as well, with that character having those already pre-existing personality traits, I think that as much as I love Deadpool, that's actually one of my favorite Marvel properties on the big screen. But I do think that even though Deadpool came first, I will give it to Margot Robbie and Harley Quinn, as I think they did it better. Like Drake said, it's not about who did it first; it's about who did it best.
Pretty much,
you know what I'm saying? So,
but
and
so
I don't listen to much rap, by the way.
But it's kind of the continuation of their characters, where now because not just because so much of the movie is focused on Harley, but because it's kind of bouncing around from point to point to point, almost in a very, very inconsistent way. There's points where like just characters will go away, and then when they come back, it's like, oh wait, I forgot you were even in the movie. Literally to the point where it's like when they remind you of their origin, they almost kind of turn it into a joke. Which again, playing back to the Deadpool angle, I don't mind that if that was the tone that this movie was going to go for. Because like there's this one line when they're all together at the Carnival Funhouse at the end when Huntress comes in and they find out her origin, and Harley Quinn is like, oh wow, that's what a tragic backstory, you know? And then they kind of have this thing at the end where she's like kind of really awkward around the rest of the characters, and she doesn't really know how to like socialize and everything, where it kind of like when she introduces herself to all the people that she kills, she like kind of comes off as stilted and awkward. I feel like that right there, again, specifically with that character, could be a really interesting facet where you play up that origin, kind of it's just like, oh, boring, seen that before, it's basically the same as Batman's, you know? And kind of play that origin up as a joke, and then have the compelling part about that character be kind of the fact that she's been so long on this path for revenge that she kind of doesn't know how to interact with normal people. That to me is more fascinating than anything that they did with that character in this movie. Yeah,
and now that she is done now, like her whole backstory has been fulfilled because she's killed all these people.
Right.
And then now it's like, no. Black Mask is still out there. Like, let's get him.
Yeah, literally. So. And it's like, it almost comes off as like an afterthought in that movie. And then with the Black Canary character, again, it's a lot of, again, Chris, I've talked to nauseam about this on this podcast. Like, again, a lot of telling, not showing, where it's just like, Montoya comes out of nowhere, and it's just like, oh, hey, I know you. Your mom was, used to help us out, and I'm like, oh, cool, kind of doing a little bit of the more traditional Black Canary origin, getting into that part, the fact that she has to keep her powers concealed, all that is fascinating, but it's like just delivered, and then she's just like, oh, I'm just a driver for Black Mask, and then I'm just going to disappear again for a certain amount of time.
I think that was the biggest problem with this movie is the Birds of Prey aspect of it. Right. Obviously, Harley Quinn was amazing, Margot Robbie.
Yes.
Because most of them, to me, are forgettable. My favorite was the Black Canary. I think her performance was really, really good. They just underutilized the Canary Cry. Like, that's the biggest... I know they use it as the huge plot point in the end, but I think she was just underutilized in her whole role. But I think she was the highlight, besides Margot Robbie, besides Ewan McGregor, of this movie.
Yeah, again, it's a situation of where all the potential for them to be great characters is there. They've got a fantastic batch of actors with all of these. Rosie Perez, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Journey Smollett Bell. Like that, those are three really, really good actors, and all those characters have the potential to be these really awesome, badass characters. But to me, it's like because this movie was almost like a backdoor and kind of winked and shrugged and kind of got through how each of the characters are introduced. It's a really fascinating plot device, but that's really all it comes down to. Is they're ultimately just plot devices in order to kind of fill out the already very confusingly worded title.
Oh, right. It's a Birds of Prey movie, right? Okay,
that's
let's get them all in one spot
the Birds of
20
Prey.
minutes.
So I couldn't agree more with that, Dom. And what I will say is when I was preparing for this episode this morning, I had this thought. So let me elaborate my perspective sort of on what you just said. So I thought, like you, on my drive home last night, I thought, wow, Black Canary, that was a pretty good performance. But then I woke up this morning and I said, okay, it's time to get in the zone, right? The podcast is happening. Let's get pumped up. Let's really bring some good shit to the table. And so I was very thankful I had this thought because I now realize that was it a good performance or was it just that every other character was so underdeveloped and you really only had Ewan McGregor's character, Margot Robbie, I forget his name. I know he's like the serial killer.
Chris Messina. Chris Messina as Victor Zsasz.
Who I actually thought was even more fleshed out than the Big Bad, which I think is
really?
Sort of a fault, in my opinion. And so was Black Canary, to me, she just sort of felt like an object that existed in the film and was being used by all these different people. And then at the end, when they finally defeated the Big Bad in that diner scene, and this scene really pissed me off, it's like, okay, so now Huntress is like weird and socially awkward and everything she says isn't funny but is meant to be awkward. And then Black Canary is like sort of like just super like over the top aggressive. Like we get character development in the last 8 minutes. So So was it a good performance, or was it just that one of the big faults of this film is that we really just got to know the people we got to know really well, and I really like those characters. But if you're going to have this Birds of Prey first, Harley Quinn second thing, which insinuates ensemble, where was the ensemble? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So,
which again is a big problem that this movie has.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see the screen time now that you say that, because I think Black Canary might have had the probably third most screen time besides Margot Robbie and Ewan McGregor.
I'd agree with that.
She probably has the most.
I think I have to check.
I agree too, but she was just singing. Or she was just driving.
I think Rosie Perez had slightly more, but I think it's like around the same, even, especially with the scenes where they share.
You know what?
I
think
hated that character.
Yes, let's get into that.
The cop, like, and I don't know, like,
I hated
she's
it.
the one that I know least about
Yeah.
in terms of like the comic backstory and all that. I don't even know who the question is. Sorry, nerds out there. But that to me, I just did not
neither.
like
It's
her
okay.
character. I didn't like the story was there, but it wasn't fleshed out enough. Like her whole dynamic with the captain in there, like they kept reminding us, like, yeah, she's been put down by this her old partner who is now the captain of this, and like, yeah, like we felt that. But I didn't feel for her at all. I didn't care for the character at all. She shows up in the end, and I don't really care that she's even there. Like, she was the one that I had the most problems with, where like Huntress, like we're saying, she is kind of like a comedic relief in a movie that is all about comedy with with Harley Quinn. I liked Huntress. I very much liked the Black Canary. I had no connection at all with the police officer, but also something that we should talk about later, Cassandra Cain. Why is she even named Cassandra Cain? That is such a huge character in this world and such a badass woman in this world, to be this just pickpocket in this movie, throwaway. That was my also biggest problem. So yeah.
Well, to kind of bounce off those points is like the whole Cassandra Cain thing. It's like, yeah, they've taken specific big comic book names and changed that and designated those on different characters like all the time. Like that's nothing new. That's nothing new. We've seen that before. But to kind of answer your questions about Montoya, first off, her alias, she was again a traditional male character that obviously got switched to a female. The whole thing is that back in the day, her character was actually originally going to be the inspiration for Rorschach, where kind of just to give a little bit of an inspiration behind Watchmen. The whole thing there is that Alan Moore was going to take already established DC characters, so it was going to be The Question, Blue Beetle, Peacemaker, and a few other. I think Dr. Manhattan was originally going to be the Atom, a bunch of others, and then basically DC took a look at the story that he was writing and said, "Fuck no, you are not allowed to use any of these characters." And so he basically was like, okay, and he basically like wrote kind of these different, these newer characters. So obviously, The Question became Rorschach, the Atom became Dr. Manhattan, Peacemaker became the Comedian, Blue Beetle became Night Owl, and so on and so on. And so to kind of answer that, the whole thing, you're right, where the whole thing about that character that makes it interesting on paper is the fact that it's basically like Rorschach. It's basically kind of this detective that comes into conflict a few times with Batman, doesn't agree with Batman's method, thinks that Batman's a little bit too soft on criminals, but again, they manage to reach common ground. Now, the whole thing with this character, and again, this is a vastly different character than The Question that we get on paper, but the whole thing, and again, kind of to bounce off your point and why I think there is a way to do this character interestingly, but they don't do it, which is in the sense of, again, similar to what I said with Huntress. They use that whole shtick of hers as being kind of a joke, where the whole they reference constantly that she's a big fan of 80s cop movies, and that to the point where she literally acts like them. If they play that up more as a joke and have her kind of embody the straight person, where she's like, no, she actually does believe in that, to the point where she actually ends up changing Harley and the rest of the characters around her, that's a different scenario. But they don't do any of that, which is why that character comes off as such a flat, boring, and uninteresting character that, again, is just like an 80s shtick cop.
And so, as someone who tries to really analyze these things and be critical and not just, brush something aside, because I realize that one bad performance does not make a bad actor, I think that she is really going to have to prove herself the next time I see her, because regardless of if we've just said the writing was terrible, that gimmick of lean into it, they didn't lean into it the right way, even if they should have even in the first place. But with that being said, she did not feel comfortable in her skin.
Literally.
To me, watching this film, she just felt.
She had that weird shirt on at one point.
Yeah,
so
for
maybe
no
that's why
reason.
she didn't feel.
I was really confused. I was waiting for them to explain. I'm like, why is she wearing that shirt?
Well, it's the Lost and Found. Her clothes smelled like shit, so she had to get.
Oh, okay.
So she had to go and get the Lost and Found
But I mean,
clothes and.
If anything, that distracted from an already distracting scene, because we were told the DA was her ex, but we got literally 2 seconds of screen time with
throwing that at the screen.
That was just a quick, hey, Ali Wong's popular, let's give her a paycheck.
And so, and so I'm not saying movies should be longer. I actually really liked the length of this film.
It's a good length.
It was a comfortable length as an audience goer, but unfortunately, I do think that if you're going to try to have a true ensemble piece, we probably would have needed a flashback of her getting slighted by her captain. We probably would have needed a flashback of her and the DA agent to make that one scene actually culminate and coalesce in a way that I think they wanted us to be like, oh, I feel for this character.
And make us care about that.
Because she is sort of like the light in this film. She is the most law-abiding one. Of course, she throws that away at the end. But when she throws that away at the end and joins the Birds of Prey, even though she knows Huntress is killed, Black Canary has beat people up, potentially has killed, worked for a mob boss, I didn't care. Like, I didn't think that, wow, this is some revelation. I was just like, oh, cool. Now the three people who I hate their personalities and I'm getting to actually see them are together. And I'll probably have to go and watch a movie of just them three without Harley. And that, to me, right now, seems insufferable.
I agree.
Yeah, no,
I agree. That sounds like the
what I'm
most
saying?
boring stand. Because
Like,
the
I'm
problem is because
scared
she
for
is
that
the
film.
life and heart of this movie, and they all come off as like boring sticks of mud compared to her with how they were portrayed in this movie. And so seeing a movie with just them, without Harley, I'm sorry, I don't give a fuck.
Unless they're going to make it a boring TV show like Marvel's doing with some of their characters.
God.
You know what,
Which is
though?
funny because they already had a fucking awful TV show called The Birds of Prey.
TV shows could save this because we might have time to explore and sort of get to know these characters better. Because again, we really only had like 12 to 15 minutes. But still,
Total throughout the whole movie.
Yeah. But still, I think that this property is now doomed. Because
I think that's going a little.
You mislabeled it.
I think that's going a little extreme.
Doomed, I wouldn't say, but I think
that's again another infamous TVN. What's it called? What's the word? Hyperbolization. I would say. But
they're gonna need to introduce a new, very, very interesting character to the Birds of Prey, to that team.
Who's going to carry that team? Because
I mean,
or just like get a writer that will actually like give them something to do and
but
actually
even
like
if a
play
writer
up
comes
that dynamic.
are we going to talk about that movie when there's trailer? Like,
you're
are we
right.
going to be like excited about that?
Yeah.
Like, unless it's because we're talking about now, like now that we've seen another Harley Quinn movie, now everybody wants the Poison Ivy.
Yes.
And the relationship
Yeah.
that she has with Poison Ivy. And that would be extremely cool to like
I would
explore
like that,
after a Batman film, and then maybe getting like the really, really old Batman film with Batman and Robin with Poison Ivy. I'm forgetting the name of it.
Batman and Robin.
Which is
That's
okay. It was just
literally
Batman
what it's
and
called.
Robin.
That's Batman and
I was
Robin
a
with
kid
George
when I
Clooney
saw
and
that. I
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
fucking loved that movie. Like, like getting that dynamic back of Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, because we never had a Harley
Don't have
Quinn.
it be Uma Thurman and don't have Joel Schumacher direct it. That's all I'm asking. Please.
But I think that'd
God,
be very
no.
interesting. But can we now talk about Cassandra Cain? Like, I think you were
I
mentioned
get
it a little bit.
To me,
Sure,
the whole thing about that character is it's fine. It's another piece of shit kid character where I'm like, I've seen so many of these at this point that I don't give a shit at all. I get
name her
it.
something else.
I
Her
get
name's
it.
Ashley.
I get it. It's not
And
the
now
same
she's
character.
not going to be a Batwoman.
Yeah, again,
You know,
but
like-
my whole thing is I'm like, okay, you're slightly more tolerable than Julian Dennison from Deadpool 2. It's literally the fat Australian
Didn't like
kid from
that guy.
Deadpool 2. And it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like a casting thing. Maybe it's like I feel like just get a different actress maybe in order to make that character more interesting but again, it's like
I don't want to be that guy, and please don't fucking listen to this and be like, take this soundbite. But like, I think the thing with child actors is that like we're trying to have all this representation on the screen now because that's what's in politically, and so like I feel like we've been seeing a lot more movies circulating around kids and having kids in them. If you look at like It and like this movie for example, and then there's just a few that I remember we spoke about child actors not too long ago on the podcast.
Deadpool,
I forget,
like we just mentioned.
yeah, exactly. And so like my problem with child actors is, and I use Finn Wolfhard as an example, as he's growing, I think he's losing sort of his charm and his magic.
1,000% I agree.
And so to me, it's sort of like, yes, they're younger, so you give them a little bit of a break. But in this case, I also think it kind of like broke the movie down in not a good way because she was on screen a lot, but she was very flat. It didn't feel like she was comfortable in her skin as an actor at this point in time, which I think is like a lot of my problem for the ensemble cast. But considering she's like the object, like the thing everyone's after because she literally swallows the diamond.
She was the whole story being tied together in one character because she had the connection to the cop, she had the connection to Harley Quinn, she had the connection to everything. But like Cassandra Cain, if that was going to be a plot line, Cassandra Cain should have been that character. Not what, like, this wasn't like, you could have aimed what we were saying before. Ashley. This is just Ashley. And the story is
Pretty much.
completely the same.
Literally.
Yeah.
But
so,
now
like,
they have tied themselves to Cassandra Cain.
I think the
What I
whole
was
thing
gonna-
now
there,
this is Cassandra Cain.
I think the whole thing
I
that
hate
comes. I think the whole thing that comes from that is the fact of where, again, it's a few writing touch-ups. Again, make it. Again, I hate fat shaming anyone, but it's like make it like a little bit of like a skinnier, starving kid. You know, like she's like living in a shitty foster home and she's got a cast. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't
And
think
she,
that's fat
just
shaming. That makes sense.
And she just looks bored and angsty all the time. Like that's her only character trait. Like make it like a little bit of like skinnier kid living on the streets, actually having a reason to pickpocket other than
and we've
she
seen
just
that
does it
before.
because
We've
she's
seen that
fucking
storyline.
bored.
Yeah, and also she got a $20 bill from the Black Canary,
Right.
And she didn't really look like she was that hungry. So I don't think that's fat
She
shaming.
definitely doesn't look like she's starving for food or anything.
And again, I'll bring it back to, even though the Marvel films aren't my taste, their attention to detail is very superb. Whereas I think that was something that slipped through the cracks that I think was a pretty easy thing, considering you just said it in a free-form conversation on a podcast. And so what I was going to say to wrap up about the child actor, again, she was fine, to what Dom said. She wasn't amazing. She wasn't terrible. It was a child actor. But, like, she's just another reason that I think exemplifies the way I really feel about this film, which is how much weight can Harley Quinn put on her back until it breaks.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And it's funny that you bring
And
it
the
back.
hyena.
Because
Big
I kind of
point in
bring
the
it
movie.
back to that.
Bruce,
it's funny that you mentioned
Bruce
that
popped off the screen.
because this is where probably this conversation is going to take a very big plot twist in that, which is that I think that, again, the fact of, you're right, with all the problems that we have talked about, kind of to your point of how much weight can Harley Quinn hold, I think the fact that this movie, I thought, was so strong in terms of its portrayal of specifically that character, not to mention the dynamic of her back and forth with Ewan McGregor, who to me, besides being the other best part about this movie besides Margot Robbie, just is clearly just having a ball with this role. Like I mentioned,
Had
the
a
fact that
great
he was
time.
embodying the best of Tim Curry, like from back in the day, just like those little nuances, woe is me, and I'm so dramatic, but I'm such a psychopath. But he's just delighting in it, and so the fact of where you're laughing at the fact of just how psychopathic it is, and it's a very tricky thing to nail. And so it's almost like the character may as well be gay, which is really funny because you think about his relationship between him and Zaz, like that is such a gay relationship.
I had
it's
read an
not
article
even funny.
that was supposed to be a thing.
Yeah.
That it was supposed to be the
Why
first
didn't
openly
you?
gay character
Why didn't
in the
you? That
DCEU.
would've been awesome. Well, again, props to Warner Brothers because look at what happens every fucking time Disney releases a press release saying, this is going to be a gay character. We get fucking like LeFou, Josh Gad, and Beauty and the
Yeah.
Beast. So fuck that shit. So compared to that, I'm glad we got what we got. But
So you think it was a cutting room floor?
It was because they had mentioned
actually
it.
had to have been.
They mentioned it at the end. We killed your best friend.
Yeah.
So they made sure that the point was, no, they were not gay.
Yeah.
They were not in a relationship.
Okay.
Where I had read prior that was supposed to be the thing. It
Right,
was supposed to be
but
the first
going back to it,
relationship
it's
like
funny
that.
because with all of these problems that I had, I still had a blast watching this movie. All of these problems, again, they're problems that I acknowledged that were legitimate problems that kept this way. Again, it's why I'll say this is a good movie, not a great movie. But I had such a fucking blast watching this. This was, to me, the most amount of just pure sitting back, enjoying myself, and having fun that I've had in a movie in a while. And again, that's something that I think I'll have to give to every theater-going experience that I've had so far this year, which is I have not gone to a theater and seen a movie so far within the year of 2020 that I have not had fun with. You know, I thought every single time she cracked a joke, a visual gag, anything, I was laughing my ass off. Anytime McGregor opens his mouth in that movie, I am laughing my ass off. The action, again, say what you will, again, just good. Bringing in people who actually know how to shoot action because they brought in Chad Stahelski from John Wick in order to coordinate the action, and it fucking showed because those action sequences I thought were the best parts of the movie to me.
So good.
They really
creative.
nailed
So
it.
good.
Like the way that they move the camera, the way that they utilize the set to their advantage, like the way the choreography, like everything about that to me worked, and to me it all worked in the service of helping to make this character the best possible version of this character that we could possibly get. So for my money, that is what I enjoyed, and that to me is what saved this from being just another drag from DC.
Yeah, and what they used in the police scene where they were in the in captivity, where they were trying to get Cassandra Cain out when Harley Quinn went into there. That fight scene inside all of those cells with the water on the ground, they would have like an inch or two of water that she was like splashing through and hitting all these like. That one was like probably my favorite fight scene out of all of them.
Yeah, me too.
The end was really fun too because everybody was. It was just crazy, you know.
The one
roller
shot-
skates, all this stuff.
The one shot that sticks in my mind from that scene is when she like takes the bat and does like the 360 with the water. See, slow-mo usually really pisses me off in action films.
Yeah.
Like it always feels like an excuse.
Especially since a lot of these DC movies have still been using the action speed ups and the slowdowns that Snyder has
Yeah.
done notoriously in every one of his fucking movies.
And they feel
Wonder
like
Woman did it.
excuses to me, whatever that might be. Maybe it just didn't translate, but I actually thought it was like a nice touch in this film. It exemplified, and I'm not just talking superhero movies, I'm talking action films. Like the slowdown and speeding up of this movie, I think really A, like paid tribute to the character, and B, also like helped to exemplify the moment in a nice way. So with that being said, as we are sort of starting to run our course here on this episode, why don't we all just go around, give our closing statements, and Joe, on this show we like to do a rating out of 5 stars. You can do 2.16 or whatever, however many stars you want to give it, down to the exact decimal. That is up to you. But I mean, Dom, how do we want to start these conclusions?
Basically, just basically the fact of, again, in order to kind of tie up my thoughts on this, and basically what I said about Letterboxd is, again, even with, well, again, DC has obviously had a very interesting track record, and the whole thing is that, say what you will about any franchise, good, bad, whatever, I think. Again, the consistent franchises, the Marvels and everything, it's always good, especially when they can pull off that amount of consistency for that long. Look at Marvel, look at Harry Potter, James Bond, even though, again, the whole thing there is that just the fact that they've just been able to adapt with the times. That's how that franchise has lasted so long. But I also like to give shout-outs to the inconsistent franchises, because even though not every single one of their entries may line up within, like, a precise pecking order, like you look at that and you're just like, oh, I automatically know that it's part of that franchise. I kind of enjoy that, weirdly enough, because even though it may not measure up quality-wise, I still admire it for its uniqueness and being able to stand out. It's something that I've talked about repeatedly with Star Wars, about how, again, Star Wars' biggest problem, but also its most defining trait, is its inconsistency. And it's the same thing that I'm going to say about these DC movies that we've gotten. Started with Man of Steel up until now. Every DC movie before that, it was just kind of whatever. They were all kind of these solo, what ifs. Obviously kind of the only big franchises that existed before this were the Superman franchise with Christopher Reeve, the Batman franchise between Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, and George Clooney, and the Dark Knight trilogy. And so this is kind of like at their first shot at like kind of this expanded universe experiment. They tried their copycat Marvel days. That failed on them miserably, but at the very least, unlike a lot of the other franchises that tried to copy Marvel, they were at the very least kind of able to course correct. And I think even though they haven't put out a movie that I have loved, they have been on the right track, and I feel like they have been doing everything that they have needed to. Where, again, Chris, to your point, where you're constantly willing to give DC credit for trying, at the very least, over Marvel, which seems to consistently put out the same thing over and over again. I understand that point, but again, I'm not going to fault either one of them, because, again, what works for Marvel has worked for Marvel. But again, even though I may not have loved Wonder Woman, I think the third act of that movie is hot garbage. Even though I may not have loved Aquaman, even though I may not have loved Shazam, I think that they have been steps in the right direction. I think the fact that they are taking these risks with these wild tones and ultimately being kind of these opposite superhero movies, where Aquaman is kind of more of this like crazy fantasy movie, Shazam is kind of this more kid-centric, fun family film. And now with this movie kind of is almost like a pulpy crime comedy, almost in the sense of like Deadpool, So in the sense of kind of like those different kind of genre movies, again, not something that I love, but I give it credit for being a step in the right direction. I think that by the time they hit the Batman movie that's going to be directed by Matt Reeves and the Suicide Squad sequel that's going to be directed by James Gunn, I think that's when they'll finally hit their stride. And those two movies, I think, are going to be like their linchpin echelon best movies. But for this movie, for all of its problems, I still had a fucking blast watching it. And I was very entertained with it, all the problems aside. So I'm giving this 4 out of 5 stars.
Wow. Okay.
Good praise. Good praise.
Yeah. Joe, we're gonna save the guest or the best for last. So let me just go, and then you can close that one out. So for me, this movie, it was fun. Like, I enjoyed going out, hanging out with some friends, seeing this movie. It wasn't like I went and was like checking my phone and just waiting for like the diner hangs afterwards. It was like, cool, we'll have something like to talk about. This movie gave me something to talk about, and for that, I appreciate it. I like what they did. I really enjoyed, showing that, like, female characters can and are just as badass as superheroes as the male characters. That was cool, because I think whereas Marvel does have a lot of like really cool female characters, there's always like that male character there in the same fight scene, or at least in my bubble of Marvel. Granted, I haven't seen all the films, but I've seen a lot. And so for me, DC did something pretty cool with that, because all these characters fought like badasses. I just wish that they were more fleshed out and as badass as Ewan McGregor or Margot Robbie's characters, because if this was a film full of that, me being already biased towards the DC universe, I would have probably given this a star rating like Dom. But because it felt a little thin, and because I think, again, Margot Robbie's character, her back must be hurting, I think I can honestly only give this 2.5 stars. I am curious to see where it goes, but you got a few more films until you lose me. unless we
Yeah.
have to do this for the podcast. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Which we're going to.
So
saying
you,
right
so you
now.
haven't lost me.
Just saying it right now so that I can break any sort of illusions. We are going to have to.
So I guess as like if this was like I was gonna watch a film alone at home and it wasn't for the podcast because so much comes out, you got a few more films until you're not even on like my Netflix queue. But you know, I'm still there for now. Strong characters.
Yeah,
Character.
I'm gonna kind of segue off of what you said about how Marvel does their female-oriented films because Captain Marvel felt like it was trying to. I think Marvel was trying too hard to hit that point of these very strong female characters. I think they made it a point to do that, and they tried to put it in. They tried way too hard to do it. I felt this movie did it very well. I didn't feel like they were selling me on these female characters. I think they were just straight up badass, and it was fun to watch. And I didn't feel like I was being preached to that these characters were badass. They just showed us that they were badass. Also, I wanted to talk about how the rated R title, for me, wasn't hit. I think they should have used a lot more of that room that they had for making this a rated R film. Like seeing a Deadpool compared to this, although the tones are similar, Deadpool took rated R to a new level that this movie never lived up to in that way. There's a few like ACL tears, and then at the end with the grenade, great.
There's a lot of ACL tears.
Yeah, there was
in this
probably
movie.
about 6 or 7 of those.
Something like that.
They won't be back for another year.
Yeah.
But I feel like they didn't live up to that rated R title. I think they like hit their check marks of like, we had a few injuries in the movie, was great. We had a few curse words. Like, I think we hit that rated R spot. But I think they had a lot more room to play with that I would have loved to see from a Birds of Prey or Harley
smoke
Quinn
'em if you
movie.
got 'em.
It's funny that you mentioned that actually because I feel like in a way I always have this problem with rated R properties, which is where I don't like it when specifically again it's a problem that I've had with a lot of R-rated superhero movies, specifically with those released by Zack Snyder, where they think that just because they've got an R rating, they're like, oh yeah, we can go out of our way and show these are not for kids. When really it's like, and it kind of almost ends up making the movies come off as less mature because they're for kids. And I think this movie again very similar to what Deadpool did. I still think Deadpool did it better, but again similar to what this movie did, which is where it was still able to toe the line between kind of still being that pulpy, fun comic book film while also having that little bit of rated R. Because to me, again, the difference between something like a Deadpool and this versus something like a Logan or a Joker, again, both very different. Well, again, they're all rated R stuff, but you would not think of those movies as being similar at all. You know?
I agree.
So Joe, what's your star rating then?
If this was a Harley Quinn movie, I would have given it a 4.5. But it's not a Harley Quinn movie. It was a Birds of Prey movie, and for that,
it is a Harley Quinn movie. It's just called Birds of Prey.
It's just called Birds of Prey,
reason.
and the Birds of Prey are just a plot line for Harley Quinn. I'm gonna give it a 3.8 because like you said, Dom, like I had a great time watching this movie. I was cracking a bunch of jokes to Chris in the corner.
Yeah, he was.
I hit a very nice Ewan McGregor who didn't have the high ground, and that's why I had lost that
good.
fight.
It was good.
It was a
good.
nice
Yeah,
crack
yeah.
there. But yeah,
the marketing,
again,
right?
Yeah, it's to me that's where it faltered, was because if I was seeing a Birds of Prey movie, I would want to see more of the Birds of Prey and more of that storyline being fleshed out. But because it was a Birds of Prey movie and not a Harley Quinn movie, I'm rating it a little bit lower. But I did have a great time seeing this movie. And like you're saying, I think they kind of hit their stride a little bit in these past few movies with Shazam and Aquaman and Wonder Woman. I really can't wait to see what happens next. I'm very excited for Batman. I'm very excited for the Suicide Squad with James Gunn, like you said. That's going to be dope. I love that Margot Robbie's going to get another chance. I want to see what's going to happen with the Joker, because when they did portray this movie as the Joker, it was the cartoon version, like that was in her bedroom.
Yeah, again, it was you had the few shots from Suicide Squad. You had, but every single shot that had Jared Leto in it, I don't know if they digitally erased him or they just cut away and just made it. There was all the shots of the most you saw of him was the back of his head, but for
I'm pretty sure you never saw his
0.1
Joker.
millisecond. You never once, I think, saw his face. I caught glimpses of him, because there were shots from Suicide Squad where I'm like, okay, I know that he was in those shots.
Yeah. So you think about it, but they did a very good job of separating from that, because I had never thought.
Yes.
What I tweeted though. So every laugh in this movie was way better than Jared Leto's laugh. The hyena's laugh was a better Joker laugh. Saz's laugh, or Zaz, whatever you say his name, his laugh was better than Jared Leto's Joker laugh.
I mean, Joaquin Phoenix's laugh is the most uncomfortable thing I heard last year, and I'd still take that shit over fucking Jared Leto's laugh.
100%.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jared Leto. I love the guy. It just didn't
I'm
work
glad
out.
you
I
do.
wish he had so
I kinda-
much more.
Someone
kinda
has to.
don't. Well,
I
no,
like
but-
him as a music fan.
I
I'll
like
tell you
him as
that
a
much.
sure. He's a good musician and he's a good actor, but he just sounds like a pretentious.
Okay,
piece
so
of
but
shit
not going
in
on a
real
Jared
life.
Leto rant, but
Right.
I wish he had more screen time in Suicide Squad to kind of flesh out his character. He did kind of get wronged of, they just kind of dropped him after that. But I think it was because there was so much on the cutting room floor that he didn't get to portray the Joker that he
I don't know.
liked.
I saw some of those extra deleted scenes, and
I wasn't sold on it, but I would have loved to see it more.
Fellas, you know what this all sounds like to me? A conversation for another day. With that being said, Joe, you had brought up Twitter, so why don't we let you take the first steps to getting us out of here? Where can they find more great tweets like that and just keep up with all that you're doing?
If you wanted to, follow me at NYAverageJoe on Twitter. Same thing on Instagram and stuff if you guys want to. I hope I'll be back on this podcast. I had a great time with you guys, so thank you guys for having me on here. Love talking nerd shit with you guys, so just thanks again.
Just because of the fact that you're the first guest that thanked us and did it in such like a well done way, you'll be back.
You didn't hear that type of gratitude from Pat or Johnny or Andrew. None of those fucks.
Those assholes leave us for dead.
Fuck Andrew. Like, what are we talking about here? No, I'm just Andrew, I love you, brother.
We'll see if he actually listens to this podcast. That'll be the test.
Like you just said, it's good someone does. It's good someone loves it. Now, so you guys know me. I am Chris, the TV nerd. TVN, don't wear it out. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. It's at Christian Evanko. What do? I make music. I make podcasts. You can check out my band, The Stash. Pretty easy. Sounds like you'd spell it. Same with the podcast. It's Talkin with Andrew and Chris. And also, right now, Talkin TV. But the cool thing about our podcast that we do is we yank that G out there because we want to get right to the point. So it's Talkin with no G. Dom, tell them where they can find you and all the other good stuff.
I'm so glad there was no string attached to that G, because I was about to be like, or no spot attached to that G, because I was about to be like, oh, damn, that's a whole different type of yanking game that we're talking about here. But,
this is definitely an explicit podcast.
In order to tie it up,
we hit that rated R title.
Oh, please. We are a rated R podcast.
That was good.
So, in order to tie it up, I am, of course, Dom the Movie Nerd. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all under my name on the interwebs that I have had for the last couple of years, Movie Nerd Reviews. You can also find this podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, and unfortunately not SoundCloud. We don't do SoundCloud, unfortunately. All under the one name, Talkin TV, no G, or Talkin TV Podcast. That's it. And so, Chris, can I say my thing? Am I allowed to say my thing?
I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Dom has, in the first episode, he so naturally figured out the greatest way to end this show. Just enjoy the ride. Dom, take it home.
Watch more fucking movies, people. We out.